Minister, and he looked a very relieved man. There was all kinds of confusion in Parliament today in the Lok Sabha before we saw a clause-by-clause vote, and I have to say it was an excruciatingly long voting process that finally saw the passage of the Goods and Services Tax Bill through the Lok Sabha. But that's the easy part. The government is now already into overdrive to try and get the GST bill passed through Rajya Sabha, and some intense calculations are being worked on to see if the Congress's decision to abstain from a vote could actually help the passage of the bill in the upper house of Parliament. So how do the numbers really stack up? Ritu joins us now to do the number crunching for us. Ritu, so here's what we do know. The Congress at 68 seats is against the bill. We don't know whether it will walk out as it did in the Lok Sabha or it will actually vote against the bill. Here's what we also know. The AIADMK with 11 seats is against the bill. Again, we don't know whether they will walk out or whether they will vote against the bill. The third aspect to this is what we know for a fact is the Biju Janata Dal and the Trinamool Congress. The Trinamool with 12 seats, the Biju Janata Dal with 7 seats are definitely going to be voting in favor of the Goods and Services Tax Bill. What are the other calculations that you've been able to do? Is this government going to be able to push this through the upper house of Parliament?
We spoke to people in the Parliament as well as my colleagues spoke to their sources in Finance Ministry, and all of them had to say just one thing, and that is that will be a difficult task of getting the GST bill passed in GST constitutional amendment bill passed in Rajya Sabha will be a very difficult task. Let me now tell you about the numbers. The government is looking at a magic figure of 123 that day, and the condition for that is that Congress should walk out. And this is what the basis of the calculation is. The total House strength is around 244. And 50% of that comes to around 122. Now, according to the rules, because it's a constitutional amendment bill, it has to have two-thirds majority. Now, two-thirds of these votes for this constitutional amendment bill on GST, that has to be more than the 50% of the Rajya Sabha strength. Now, if all the members are present, and that's of course a hypothetical scenario, the two-thirds majority, that number comes to around 162. Now, what government is banking on is a probability that Congress will walk out. And if Congress walks out with about 68 members, the House strength comes to around 176. Now, two-thirds of that House strength, if Congress walks out, that comes to around 117. Of course, that will not be enough to get the bill passed. You will have to get more than 122. So, apart from getting its allies to vote, the government will also have to depend heavily on JDU, which most probably will be voting for the bill, but even then it will not reach the magic number of 123. It will then have to depend on parties like NCP, and most likely NCP will also vote for the constitutional amendment bill. But we don't know at the last moment what will be the stand of SP and BSP. SP has 15 seats and BSP has 10 seats. So if these two parties vote for the constitutional amendment bill, you will reach and cross the number of magic figure of 123, which the government is hoping to. However, as I said, these are all ifs and buts. It all remains to be seen what stand the Congress takes and all these parties like SP and BSP takes on that particular day in Rajya Sabha.
Absolutely, and as Virappa Moily told you, Ritu, wait and see what we do in the Rajya Sabha. So let's see how this pans out. But thanks very much for taking us through the arithmetic and the likely scenarios. Joining us now on this historic day is R. Muralidharan, Senior Director at Deloitte India, Prateek Jain, Partner of Indirect Tax at KPMG, and Rajeev Dimri, Head of Indirect Taxes at BMR Associates. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here. Murali, let me start by asking you, Ritu was just taking us through the arithmetic, the likely arithmetic if this bill has to pass through the upper house, through the Rajya Sabha. What's your gut telling you? Is it a done deal in this session?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say at this stage, but considering the fact that the Congress did a walkout in Lok Sabha, I feel it's going to be a tough thing for the bill to get through in Rajya Sabha. So, but one has to wait and see because things change every day and rather every minute.
Well, things do change every minute. This is, of course, politics. But Pratik Jain, coming to you, do you think the grand compromise that's been made by the government has led to an imperfect GST in that sense? So let's forget for a moment that this is yet to go through the Rajya Sabha, but hypothetically, if it were to pass through the Rajya Sabha, do you believe that the grand bargain with state governments has led to a very imperfect GST, or one that we can live with?
No, I think this is a reality of our lives. It's not going to be a perfect GST. Compensation will have to be given for 5 years, as the finance minister said. That's part of the bill. And petroleum products is only kept out initially, and GST Council may decide, let's say, after a couple of years to include that. Of course, the only thing which is out is alcohol in that sense. So I think I will live with it. I mean, we have to realize that GST is a process which is going to start now. It's not an ideal GST. But certainly, this GST is going to be much better than the existing tax system. And you heard Finance Minister saying that the rate will be not as high as 26-27%. My feeling is that the rate would be around 20-21%. And if that is the case, that will be lower on most product than what you have today. And it is going to be a world class tax system. So, of course, there are improvements which are possible, which are warranted, but it will take time. So I will live with this GST, at least to start with.
Okay, so you're betting on 21 to 22% as far as the revenue neutral rate is concerned. Rajeev Dimri, taking that forward, the finance minister says that the leaked revenue neutral rate of 27% is unviable. It's too high. Nobody wants such a high GST rate. Do you believe that we got some clues about the thinking of what the revenue neutral rate is likely to be? Because strangely and surprisingly, the finance minister today alluded to the 13th Finance Commission's recommendations of 18%. He went on to say that that is not a commitment and that is speculation at this point in time. And of course, the final decision rests with the GST Council. But what would you say would be the ideal revenue neutral rate be?
I don't know if I have a specific number that I could quote, but yes, I certainly believe that 27 or high 20s is an unworkable solution. The finance minister had said earlier as well that the rate will be much lower than 27%. In a separate statement, I think he said it on the floor of the House. So I completely agree that the rate doesn't need to be that high. How that rate came out was one of a possible scenarios. There are multiple scenarios. You make assumptions, you make calculations, and one such calculation was 27%. It has never been affirmed as the decision by anybody, but it was being seen as one possibility, which is extremely high, and I completely agree that it has to be closer to 20, and if he's talking about a rate of 18, that's even better. Lower the rate, better of chances of compliance, better of chances of success of this tax, and therefore I agree that it has to be 20 or lower. That's
well, the lower the rate, the better compliance, but our sources tell us that 18% is no can do at this point in time. It is likely to be higher than even 22%. But Murli, let me come back to you. One of the issues, of course, is states having to give up on what they see as key revenue drivers. Let's look at the issue of petroleum, because what is not clear is, and the Constitutional Amendment Bill doesn't specify whether petroleum will continue to be outside of the ambit of the GST for a period of 2 years. That decision is left with the GST Council to be notified by the GST Council. What is the best case scenario, you think?
See, as far as the Constitution Amendment Bill is concerned, yes, unlike liquor, which is outside of the definition of the GST, petroleum is inside the definition. That's a very positive. Now, there looks to be an agreement between the center and the states that for a period of 3 years, petroleum products will be kept out. It looks to be an informal agreement, but the fact is that the GST Council has to notify from which date it will come into effect. And if you see the powers of the GST Council, the central government has got 1/3 powers and the state has got 2/3 powers, and every decision has to be with a 75% majority. So while the center will always be willing to include petroleum under the GST regime, a good number of states have to come up and agree for the introduction, which I believe that in the initial 2-3 years, when the states see that there is no revenue loss happening, so they would come forward and agree for the inclusion, maybe if not 2 years, maybe after a period of 3 years. I think it will happen eventually.
It will happen eventually. The question is how long, 2, 3 years or longer than that. Rajeev, what's your take on petroleum and the grand bargain that's been dealt with state governments on that?
Well, let's put it differently. The fact that, so there are two ways in which products can be excluded. Either they get excluded by specifically naming them in the Constitution Amendment Bill, which would be, the way the Constitution is written or will be amended. The other way is to keep them out as a matter of policy. The fact that alcohol was to be kept out of GST as a policy was always clear. It's not something that got announced today. It got clarified today. So it was meant to be out, so was petroleum, that while GST Constitution Amendment Bill will not specifically exclude it, but the way it has been designed and the way the policy is that it will be kept out for a period of time, and petroleum will come back into the GST, whereas alcohol for more than one reason will remain out of GST. And it's not something that happened today. That was always the going in position for a number of years. It just got clarified today more specifically.
Okay, Pratik, back to you. That 1% additional tax that manufacturing states have, in a sense, managed to get from the finance minister and from the central government in order to compensate them from a revenue loss. The finance minister arguing that a lot has been said about the cascading impact, but he doesn't believe it will have a significant cascading impact. Isn't this a real concern? Isn't this a legitimate concern?
No, that's a really legitimate concern. That's a huge concern, in fact, because this 1% is not only on interstate sale, but probably also on the stock transfers. And that leads to a lot of cascading. And by the time the goods reach the end customer, you could actually have a 3 or 4% additional tax. So certainly, I think to start with, we should not have this 1% if that is a possibility. Even if we have this 1%, this 1% should only apply on interstate sale and not on stock transfers, because if you have stock transfer, your own product, when you move from one state to another, you have to pay 1%, then I'm afraid much of the benefit that we're talking about of GST will get diluted. So certainly 1% is a big concern for the industry, and all the industry associations have recommended that this 1% should be done away with.
Well, it looks like this one is going to go through, as is Pratik Jain, Rajeev Dimri and Murli. Appreciate you joining us here on India Business Hour with your take on what the goods and services tax means and whether we are likely to see the GST implementation on the 1st of April if the Rajya Sabha does pass that, as Ritu was pointing out, is a big if at this point in time. And other news from Parliament.
That's right. The government, Sheen, had